Presentation. I think Maria, if you're ready.
Sure. So actually, before we start, let's just make sure we know everybody who's in the room. I'm Maria Wardoku. I'm a planner with Also Planning and Design, and I've been working on this bike and pedestrian plan since the beginning of the year.
I'm Alyssa Miller. I am the representative from City Council. I was the first and not the last. Sorry, I was. So I'm going to be real quiet tonight.
We're happy you're here.
I'm Anna Zaleski. I teach at Rocky Bridge, and I have kids. I do lots of walking and biking, and I'm happy to be part of the committee.
Isaac Curtis, Crankworks Bike Shop, downtown.
Mike Noreen, Conservation and Efficiency Coordinator with the City of River Falls and City Forester.
Ken Kittleson, a physical therapist, manager of rehab at the hospital here, as well as Hastings.
I'm Kendra Owner, another planner, and I'm also working on the outdoor rec plan.
Amy Peterson, Community Development Director.
Emily Scheidler, City Planner.
Excellent. I'm saying you'll soon be receiving less emails from me, hopefully, right? So, but I'm the one you've gotten emails from.
So this is the agenda for the meeting tonight. First, I just want to have an opportunity for overall comments and questions on the draft plan. If anybody came with something that they want to make sure we talk about, we'll talk about that right off the bat. And then wanted to do just a recap of content from the previous meetings. How did we get here? And not everybody's been able to come to each meeting, so just kind of walking through that process, how we got to the plan. Third, talk some about the project and policy prioritization. That's something that was done pretty much after the last meeting that we had. So that's all, it's all in the plan, but just wanted to make sure to talk through that since we didn't get a chance to discuss that before. And then just end with the steering committee making a recommendation around the plan, and that's the sheet of paper that I think looks like everybody has that Sam prepared. So a couple of options on decision that you can make tonight, and then just touch on the next steps of how this plan will hopefully get adopted and move into the next phase. Any questions on the plan coverage? So just touching base on the timeline, as you all know, we're doing this bike and pedestrian plan in the context of the comprehensive plan and the park and recreation plan. They're all happening at the same time. So we went through data collection, developing a goal, the goals and vision, the analysis and the plan drafting, and so kind of on track for adoption, although I think they're all going to be adopted together in March, is my understanding.
Yeah, and congratulations, because you guys are coming through first. Good job.
Yeah, it's all about winning.
So this might be a good time to talk about other dates really quick, Maria, if that's okay.
Sure.
So December 15th, the bike and ped plan, the plan that we're talking about this evening, will be for a plan commission in a workshop setting. And then that's the primary date that I wanted to flag for you guys, right? Am I missing anything else?
Yeah, the other one would be the March 28th, I think, date.
And that's so far out, I don't even have that in my head, but March 28th is when it'll actually be adopted, right?
Yeah. And not that you guys have to attend, but it would be good to have maybe some voices or support if you're available either of those evenings.
Can you say the first date again?
Yeah, December 15th. I think that's a Thursday. I can certainly send a little bit more information as we get closer as well.
So, yeah, just started with overall comments and questions. think Sam sent out the draft plan before Thanksgiving. So we're gonna review broadly things that are in it, but yeah, did anyone come with something that you want to bring up?
I'd like to know more about safe routes to schools. I'm curious about the complete streets and how that applies to, well, I guess I'd like to know more about how that works. And then there was one dot, a grade separated crossing on State Highway 35 off of Paulson.
To connect Sterling Ponds, was that one?
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about it.
Anything else?
Sure, and because this is a pretty significant document that we had to take a look at, I assume that conversation about things will sort of jog memory, so feel free to speak up and raise your hand at any point in time in the conversation if there are things you'd like addressed or things that your memory was jogged on, so.
We had talked a little bit today about the shared lane on Main Street. We should probably talk about that a little bit.
Sure, so I didn't have a chance to talk to chat with Maria before the meeting, so no worries on that. Because we are going to be doing the Main Street plan in the not so distant future in the next year, so ideally, obviously, we're gonna go in a little more in depth on Main Street specifically. So whether or not that's gonna be actually the shared use path as the final recommendation for that stretch of the downtown is a little bit up in the air, but that'll be addressed more in depth on a planning level when that comes across. Just want to flag this, so you know if folks are engaged on the Main Street program or plan and they see that and they say, whoa, during the bike and pedestrian plan, we're going to do a shared use path. That's sort of the explanation as to why we're going to get a little bit more in-depth analysis as that Main Street plan will be its own kind of survey or study similar to what we've done with the bike and pedestrian plan. So just flagging that for folks, and that's my mistake. I should have let you know ahead of time.
Yeah, it's good to know. Okay. So I heard talking about safe routes to school, complete streets, that grade separated crossing on over 35, and then I don't know if the shared use path on Main Street is something to discuss or more just an FYI. That would change, that could change with a planning level.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to include something in the text that talks about the Main Street corridor plan in the future, because I wholly get from a bike ped perspective that the recommendation makes the most sense, but until we start looking at the width of the roadway, the sidewalks, and where the priorities are for the downtown, I don't want to pin us in. I want to leave us with options when we get there, so.
So shared use path, can you remind me, that's something that's not a sidewalk, it's a separate.
It's wide enough for people to bike and walk on at the same time.
Yep, okay.
And honestly, sorry, it may be a protected lane. It's hard to tell on this.
On Main Street, you know?
Yeah, in the downtown.
So there, it might be worth adding text that just clarifies that the facility types are, I think, subject to change with that, you know, if you're studying one particular street and figuring out what's going to work there. I think that's true of Main Street, and it's true more broadly. It's kind of like, this would be ideal based on what we know about the speeds and the volumes, and that it doesn't mean it's absolutely set in stone to do that facility type. It's just kind of the starting place, I think.
Along those lines, what I read in there, in the major high benefits of Cedar Street reconstruction as a greenway. What Cedar Street is that? Is that east or west or?
That'd be west.
Yeah, so that was, in my understanding, identified by the engineering.
As an opportunity, and so, again, you know, we touched on this a little bit last week, and that's perfectly fine, and exactly what, you know, a greenway means really varies, right? So we're doing a high level planning, the actual specifics of what a greenway means for Cedar Street, that'll be something that's determined at the design and the engineering level when, you know, funds are available and we're actually ready to implement that plan, so. Again, very malleable, still, and it's not intended to be the end all be all, but it is a good starting place, as well.
And for Cedar in particular, that was identified as a street needing reconstruction. So the idea is to take advantage, if a reconstruction needs to happen, to do it in a way that would capture some stormwater and improve the, you know, water quality in the community. You know, ideally we'd be capturing stormwater on all the streets, but was trying to take advantage of knowing there was a need to reconstruct for that street. I'm wondering if it makes sense to go through the next part and talk about the safe routes, complete streets, and grade separated crossing as we talk about the policy and recommendation prioritization. Maybe do that all together. So kind of remembering where we have been over the last year. In our first meeting, which was in January, we asked the steering committee to think about the vision for the future. You know, this is an example of one of the slides that you all contributed to. 20 years from now, I want walking and biking in river falls to be, and people said, the norm, accessible to everyone, the first choice for many daily trips. So we used that input and developed a vision, and then went ahead and shared that with the public at the, I think it was a February open house. And then there was also some online engagement too. So that vision that we came to is walking and biking are comfortable modes of transportation that connect people of all ages and abilities to one another and to everyday destinations via safe, accessible infrastructure. And people largely said they love it or they like it. So I had a good sense of support generally from that early public engagement. We also developed goals. A little small on that screen, sorry. I wonder if we're able to hide things. It takes up a little bit more, but so developed those. That's a little better. Developed 5 goals to support the vision: accessibility, connectivity, health and safety, sustainability, and economic vitality. So accessibility was about supporting the needs of people who choose not to drive or who cannot drive or who have barriers to accessing essential destinations using our existing car-oriented transportation system. That was accessibility. Connectivity is around quickly accessing everyday destinations via walking and biking on accessible, pleasant, unpolluted facilities. Health and safety is about promoting comprehensive health and well-being of everybody through having active transportation facilities that connect people to their key destinations. Sustainability is about designing for the long run and taking into account the primary environmental, financial, and social benefits of projects. And finally, economic vitality. Active transportation and trail systems foster tourism and economic development. And we also shared those goals with the public, and broadly saw pretty strong support for that. So we did that initial engagement, that open house and some online engagement, and then brought those results back to you all at our April steering committee meeting. Shared a bunch of different results. I'm just highlighting one of them here, where people were asked, how do you currently move? The top answer was in a personal vehicle traveling alone. But then, and what is your desired way to move? Number 1 was walking, number 2 was biking. So in the comprehensive plan engagement, which wasn't all about ped bike stuff, it came across in many of the questions, how much people want to be able to walk and bike around the community. Also at the April meeting, we shared the existing conditions analyses. So this included the live, work, play analysis, which is about anticipated demand for people biking and walking, crash analysis, level of traffic stress. This was both from the perspective of somebody biking and the perspective of someone walking. How comfortable are the streets in River Falls for biking and walking? And we saw that, perhaps unsurprisingly, Main Street, Division, Cascade, streets that have more traffic are generally looking to be higher level of stress for people walking and biking. And then we also did an equity analysis. And I'll just note that ultimately, I think that the equity analysis didn't tell us as much as we wanted it to because of the size, because of data, like how big the census tracts are. But I think it still did highlight like the area along Main, like south of Cascade, where there are a lot of multifamily housing buildings and students, and needing to be able to connect people there to where they need to go. So that pretty much takes us through the April meeting. I think we ended that meeting by asking what we should put on Engage RF to ask members of the public. So shortly after that meeting, we put up this bike and pedestrian issues and opportunities map and asked, how can we improve walking and biking in River Falls? And then people were able to comment all over that map. Overall, we heard that those streets we identified as having high levels of traffic stress, people experienced them as being stressful. People shared their insufficient facilities for walking and biking on Main Street and on Powell. The comments on Division were about a lack of adequate biking facilities and how we need some improved crossings across Division. Cascade, also some discomfort with crossings, especially a need for a crossing at Crescent and Cascade, and that idea carried forward into the recommendations in the plan. And then Cemetery Road, maintenance issues with the roadway and the path and the roundabout came up. So we put up that interactive map and then also did some in-person engagement. We did these walking and biking tours, which you were all invited to. It was generally open to the public and City Council, Plan Commission, everyone. So we had people go on a walk, I think that was in June, and that was largely focused on the downtown area. We also went on a biking tour in July, and once you're biking, you can get a little bit further in the same amount of time. So we designed this route to make sure we hit on some of those spots that people had called out as being uncomfortable. And then at our October meeting, we shared back what we heard from that. And that led really directly into our network recommendations. We put up the draft recommendations online in an interactive map. And that was something Steering Committee had a chance to look at before the October meeting, and then we had explored that, zooming in and out and checking out the draft recommendations. Also talking about the draft policy recommendations. And then, yeah, reporting back on the engagement. Was pretty much what we covered at our October meeting. See if that brings us up to the present. Yes, it does. Okay, so before we move on and talk about the project prioritization, the work that was done after the October meeting, any thoughts or anything to share about what we did January, April, October meetings? All caught up? Okay. So project prioritization. We shared a little bit about the approach to this in October, but then refined it. So the projects are the infrastructure projects. That's what I mean. Sidewalks and bike paths and bike lanes and things like that. We scored those projects up to 6 points. And that was just based on whether they have high levels of traffic stress, a history of bicycle and pedestrian crashes, and then whether they're within 500 feet of a civic institution, a park, an area that's designated as high density housing, or an area that is designated as mixed use or commercial. So kind of pulling in some of those demand factors and the safety factors to prioritize. So there's a prioritization score that's independent of how difficult it might be to implement something. So we have that prioritization score. Then we've categorized those projects into low, medium, or high complexity. And that's mostly to, I guess, to help figure out the path forward. It's not like, well, it's a high complexity project, we shouldn't do it. It's more to be able to identify, as we talk about at the end of the plan, what are some quick wins? What are some things that are really important but complex? So we're going to have to lay the groundwork for them. It's more about the approach and having a sense of how much time and resources might be associated with the project. So how do we even think about complexity? For projects, it's about would we potentially need to acquire some right of way to do this project? That's going to drive up the complexity. Will we need to coordinate with property owners or with county or state agencies? Are there likely to be some traffic and parking impacts? Are there going to be stormwater and utility impacts? And generally, is it going to be a high capital cost? And this is all very high level, you know, like planning level from, to the best of our knowledge, like how complex might something be? And you can always have something that seems simple that turns out to be, but it's our best guess. So high priority, low complexity, calling those quick wins. Things that fall into the quick win category, creating bicycle boulevards. That tends to be low cost. It's signage and it's also traffic calming. And I think the traffic calming part is important, but sometimes, or maybe historically, there's an idea that if you put up a sign saying it's a bike route, then it's a bicycle boulevard, but it's the traffic calming is integral to it. That can be like neighborhood mini traffic circles. It could be, I don't know, doing something with access control. So maybe people can't make a turn onto a street, we're diverting people away from using that street. Those are the types of things that we think about with traffic calming. And there's a bunch of opportunities to do that. State Street, Fall Street, the Johnson, Sycamore, Kennedy Street is kind of all one, just sort of bends. Spring Street, South Winter Street, and West Maple Street. And to see the exact limits of those, we can look at the map. But just for the purpose of not saying, State Street from X to X, and having a huge list. And using that as a shorthand. So bicycle boulevards, a lot of them fall into a quick win category. On West Division Street, striping and signing a conventional bike lane kind of exists right now, but could use more clarification about what it is. So that's one of those more low-hanging fruit opportunities. Striping and signing a buffered bike lane. We want to see buffered bike lanes where we have a little bit higher traffic volume, a little bit higher speeds. People want some more separation from traffic. So 2nd Street, East Division Street, and South Winter Street all have opportunities to stripe and sign a buffered bike lane without too much complexity based on what we know about those streets. So North Main Street, north of Division, there would be an opportunity for a quick build protected bike lanes. A quick build is when we use materials like flexible delineators and paint and sometimes kind of like a parking stop to create a barrier. So North Main Street has, from a planning level calculation, enough room for that. Crescent Street and East Cascade Avenue, that was what was highlighted earlier with the public input. It's being a real problem spot. Crescent Street and East Cascade, you could do crossing enhancement, and you could do it with quick build tools. So build a curb extension or a median island. You could do that with flexible delineators and paint, and that'll get you a long way in a short time. So there's that opportunity at Crescent Street and East Cascade to do something pretty quickly there where we've identified an issue. And then also some other places to look at would be crossings along Main Street, South Main Street, Spring Street, Park Street, Johnson Street, and Foster Street, all along Main Street, would be ones where you might also have that opportunity. So we don't have to wait for a street reconstruction, or even for necessarily for an in-depth study of Main Street to test out some changes. One of the benefits of doing the quick build projects is you can remove them. So you can say, we're going to put this up for a month and we're going to evaluate it and see how it changes, how fast people are driving, and how people feel when they're crossing the street. You can have that opportunity to test something out. And I just think that quick build projects can be a really great way to keep up momentum. People see something physically happening in the community, and even sometimes can help with the installation. I have installed curb extensions with fifth graders as workers. So it can also be a really good tool for engaging people. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like they could do it. Okay, so talked about most of the quick wins. Also just mentioned that South Wasson Lane the improvements are already happening. So while it's more, what they're doing is complicated, it's already in design. So That's in the low complexity category. And then also sidewalk infill, especially where funding has already been secured, then that's removed some of the complexity. So on Johnson, Sycamore, and Kennedy, there's already plans to do sidewalk infill, and there's a funding source. So those two are things that are probably going to happen anyways, but we want to make sure that they do. So that's the rationale for putting it in there. Okay, I'm gonna pause. Any thoughts on these?
I have just a concern, and I don't know anything about this, but I'm concerned that if we go with a quick build, we will never go with a permanent build. Like, so is that a legitimate concern, you know, or is it like, is that something to consider, or maybe it would make it more likely that we would make a permanent change if we saw that the quick build was effective? Is that kind of the thinking with a quick build?
Yeah, I see your concern. And do you have a thought about that, Amy?
Well, I was thinking of the plan and when you describe the demonstration quick builds, that they are set up within the plan to be temporary and to monitor and check.
Yep.
So if we're following
The plan,
protocol.
right?
They shouldn't be there for perpetuity, but
A lot depends on the quality of the materials too. So if there are some quick build installations where you're hoping it's gonna be there for 2 years. You're usually doing it with your eye on a permanent change, but you could also, if it's working, just refresh the quick build, because it's about making it safe for people to cross, or to, walk or bike along somewhere. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing if something stays as a quick build. It's not great if it's put out there and it works and then you take it down and nothing ever happens.
Right.
I would say either like, if it's working, we want to refresh the materials, get delineator that gets knocked over, or the paint gets worn down, either refresh or get it into a permanent change.
And do the enhanced crossings also include those big yellow signs? Those are, I know, have been popping up at crossings, and I think they're great, like the bigger, like what just went in by the Park Street on Main. I was so happy to see that. So is that also included in the enhanced crossing, like the one at Cascade and is it Crescent? Is that part of that? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's, again, one of those, when you go to do that specific crossing, you're gonna be analyzing the traffic conditions right there. So we're not too prescriptive about exactly what the changes are, but more that we know we need an enhanced crossing. There are a whole bunch of tools to make that happen. So the city would choose what is appropriate.
I mean, I should probably know this since I'm council, but is there a reason we don't stripe Second Street and Cascade and Division? Well, Cascade has the university for a long stretch of it. That helps slow stuff down. But like on Division, I'm thinking like even over by Greenwood and stuff, are there reasons we don't stripe those crossings? Do you know what I mean? Like when you have the big white blocks, people tend to stop. When you don't, like on Second Street at certain crossings, people will not stop for you. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm thinking we just installed one over by.
At Greenwood you did, yeah.
Yeah.
Did we stripe? No, I can't, I drive over it every day and I can't remember. but
I live right there, I can't remember. But like, is there a reason we don't stripe all the crossings on major roads, like Second, I just don't know.
So I can channel my Reed Ronsky. If we want to go back. And he was always, I haven't done this with Todd yet, so I can't channel Todd, but Reed was always that he was even hesitant with the flashing beacons because it gives pedestrians the feeling that they are protected and they are wholly not, and they need to pay attention and not necessarily act like the car is going to stop. The car should stop, but, so he always didn't want to give pedestrians a sense of protection. So I think that was one piece. Were you thinking of that or another?
No, that's, yeah, you didn't want, and the cars don't stop, if they see that painting, they weren't stopping anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that might not be our philosophy, but that's why he was very hesitant to put any bike lanes in, put any crossing, paint or flashers. But he's been there a long time.
Is there a way we could study that to see if it actually does have an impact?
I'm sure we could.
Isn't there already data about that?
Anyway, another time, but I was just thinking that, if we're doing the bike lanes and we're on Second Street, East Division, those areas that I think people naturally are because you're crossing Division to go to the library or go to St. Bridget's, or, if you want to walk up North Main, and a lot of people are crossing Second Street to get to downtown. In my experience, I'd say 1 out of 3 cars stops when they're supposed to. So I don't know. That's just my experience.
I think I had a conversation with Todd, and this is just kind of ringing a bell too, that wherever we are striping crosswalks, we also need to make sure that the curbs are ADA accessible. So that there's a little bit more than just the striping, that there also needs to be, the little bump things on the curb and make sure that they, are accessible from both directions. And so it may just be somewhat of a resource issue as well in some areas, so.
But that's a great question, and it's a great example of a quick win, something that's relatively easily implemented and that we could theoretically do in-house as a public works department or as a city. So yeah, that's the exact kind of thing that this plan, and once we have this plan, we can point to it and say, we need this here because this plan said so, and we adopted it. So yeah.
This is maybe a bigger question. It's not just connected to the slide, but I didn't see recommendations, and there's probably a reason for this, about actually lowering speed limits. Is that something that's kind of beyond the scope of this plan?
The speed limits are a whole nother thing.
Okay. Because I thought, why is it 35 by the high school? Why is it 35 on Cascade? Like, why are we holding on to those higher speeds when we know there are people, on foot and on bicycles trying to use those?
That does have a whole rationale and formula for how they are figured out based on traffic counts, and so engineering really takes a look at that and makes the recommendations based on the formula.
Okay.
So those don't get to just change.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I just, near a school, 35 feels so fast. I'll take that to the engineering department. Yeah.
My husband said that all the time.
Yeah.
Would, not to put on the spot, but would that be something we want to consider in a policy recommendation
Well, that's what Emily just said.
Oh, really? Okay.
Potentially revisit that at some point. Again, this probably goes back to Reed. I don't know where the formula came from. I don't know how I don't know if there's new updated changes that could go into the formula. I don't know, but it is something that we could take a look at.
Yeah, because there's definitely data that, about injuries, crashes, degree of injury, with speed. They're absolutely correlated. I don't know enough about the formula, because sometimes if you have a certain road classification, sometimes that's tied to funding of that road. And, so that's the kind of thing that may have been weighed in the past. But that's something that may need to be rebalanced, you know, in particular areas where, okay, if we reclassify this, and again, I think as we're thinking about the comprehensive plan and transportation and then this functional plan within that, you know, we're really trying to focus on emphasizing non-automobile related transportation and prioritizing that over the automobile, which has been historically prioritized over everything else. And so a lot of those formulas were based on moving cars,
Right.
rather than safely moving people in other modes. So that's something that I think can definitely be relooked at.
I just noticed as a pedestrian and a bicyclist, when I cross trip across Main Street a lot to get to work, and when that speed limit was lowered to 25, it did feel a lot safer, you know, because cars aren't skipping past at 40 miles an hour and you're trying to like get across that. So I just think that does make a real difference.
I'm taking notes. Some things we may not be able to quite figure out right at the moment, but.
But we're still putting together the comprehensive plan. We've got a transportation element to that, you know, so that's thinking about the system even more broadly with all modes and the impact on all modes of any of these policy decisions. So make sure that weaves in that plan too.
So we wanted to touch on the next level, still high priority, but more of a medium complexity. So high priority sidewalk infill, where we don't yet have those funding sources identified. So there's that a little bit more something to figure out to get the implementation. Striping and signing a buffered bike lane on West Cascade and on West Johnson Street. That might be a little bit more complicated than the ones we identified as quick wins. And also constructing a protected bike lane on West Maple Street right up here. Constructing shared use paths, which generally is a little bit more complex. So we've got opportunities to do shared use paths on East Division, East Cascade, West Division, Park Street, Foster Street, Olson Road, and do not know how to say that one. Hooper. Okay. Hooper Street. Opportunity to widen and enhance a shoulder on Quarry Road. And then looking at improving that intersection of Division and Second is identified as a problem. And the suggestion would be to potentially begin with a demonstration project and try out a change to that before going for a full project.
Talk about messing up the locals.
I know. Well, you definitely know when someone's not from here when they stop.
That's gonna be a heck of a study, that one. I'd just like to be a person sitting in a chair watching that mess. Wow.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about this kind of medium complexity?
The sidewalk infill, that was already planned, right? That kind of came to you, like that, those, it was like a red dot right on the map. Those were already kind of had been planned previously.
So there was a sidewalk infill study in 2016.
Okay, yeah.
That identified some high priorities. We carried that forward
Okay.
into this plan. So still high priority, but the high complexity. So calling these major high benefit projects. Main Street reconstructing to include high quality separated biking and walking facilities and intersections that are designed to prioritize people walking and biking. You know that Main Street is coming. So I don't want to be too prescriptive about it, but that from the perspective of biking and walking, hope for that to include those separated facilities and the prioritization, walking, picking. And then you mentioned Cedar Street. So the possibility of reconstructing that as a greenway with green stormwater infrastructure would be, you know, a high benefit, but also a real high complexity project. And then the construction of the Kenny River corridor planned paths and river crossings. There are a lot of them in that plan. And we identified a couple that would provide a high benefit. So connecting to Sterling Ponds, and then the Vine Street to Glen Park. There's a connection in there. So both of those would require bridges and be more complicated to figure out. Isaac, do you have a thought about that?
No, does anybody know anything about the trail work going on kind of below Rocky Branch at all? I heard some trails were going in, and then I heard Rocky Branch put up some signs that said no biking, and they were building bike trails.
Oh.
So I thought Tyler and maybe Public Works were down doing a small trail project down there this summer. But I know Cork works down there too at times.
I thought the city hired Clary Cork gentleman to build trail down there.
That I don't know.
So
Okay.
what I'm aware of is we'd identified a
Kind
segment.
of worms.
Yeah.
We'd identified a segment down there for another trail.
Yep.
We did the rough clearing kind of this summer.
Sure.
And then Cork was gonna come in and do more fine grading so that it's just more walkable, because there were still extra clearing and some smoothing out of areas. And since Cork has both the equipment and the expertise in trail building, we were gonna bring in, and we had a little bit more resources left to dedicate to that trail. They
Sure.
were brought in to finish it. It hasn't been designated as biking, no biking. I mean, I don't think any of those trails down along the river are one way or the other.
Gotcha. Okay.
The only reason I could conceivably think they would not wear any to put it on, if Cork is doing it, is if they're doing grading work or something like that. They don't want it to be just.
Under construction.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's the only thing we're aware of.
And like barbershop talk, so it could be, who knows what's right, what's wrong, what's accurate. I get it all down there.
With Rick in the past, Cork had built a number of those trails. I think there had been in the past, maybe folks that had not been as excited. The walkers weren't always excited about having the bikers on, and so there's some potential.
Is there still horses allowed down there?
Boy.
So that was a big thing when you try and ride a bike over where horses have been. It's like driving your car over pothole-filled road type of deal. But yeah, I apologize, that probably had nothing to do with your question.
Just looks like it's
Maria, I have a question.
Yeah.
The Riverside Drive to Sterling Ponds makes me think really hard, and I've been looking at the map, and I kept thinking that reference was for a westerly build, like up on the west side.
Yeah, it's a huge bridge.
But it also could go the east side of 65, and I guess I'm wondering what you guys were maybe thinking.
Yeah. I might need to pull up the map to that.
I was wondering, like, Riverside Drive to Sterling Ponds
Yeah.
that's like 2 miles apart.
So
Wait a minute.
is that maybe shorthand for crossing at the 35 and 65 interchange, which I think we had conversations about at previous meetings?
Yeah, that's maybe something to discuss.
I just want to make sure that we're clear what you guys were thinking.
Cause otherwise, as well, West Quarry to Paulson and Riverside Drive, that kind of a similar crossing over the Kinney. For a larger, higher priority, but also high complexity trail was something we had discussed as well, Maria. If you can think of, if everybody knows what I'm talking about.
I'm gonna- Here. Number project. So this purple line. Can you see that? Yeah.
Here's this purple line going along Main Street. And it looks like splitting at Quarry and Crossing.
The purple line on Main Street is its own project. That's the opportunity for a quick build protected bike lane. But the Kinney corridor, like this.
Sam, when you're done looking at that one, could you address that green dot on Highway 65?
So this is the Sterling Ponds connection from the Kinney corridor plan.
Okay, so it does head to the east side. Okay,
And would that be over the highway where we would put a protected bike lane across the highway, or would we go underneath the highway?
So
Yeah,
the protected bike lane is on Main Street.
yep,
That's that's its own thing. And then the trail from the Kinney corridor plan is what I've highlighted in yellow.
so I'm curious, and I don't know for sure, but I thought that there used to be, I don't know if anybody here knows, but there used to be a cattle crossing underneath the highway. And I remember we talked about it during King Corridor, I think, and I don't think it's still there when they reconstructed the highway, but there, I think there's potential to go under. That would be my best guess, because I think going over would just be way too.
we're putting like a protected bike walk path, like. I'm thinking of like the crossing to Stillwater with the new bridge, like where they actually have like a cement barrier, like to provide a walking, biking path on way North Main Street.
But this crosses south of Highway 65.
Here, let me move it over here. So are you, Alyssa, thinking of?
You're talking about going over 60, I mean, going over 65.
Right, like
But
kind of
this is showing going
Under.
south of there. So I'm thinking that's under.
You're just like, what, if I'm reading this correctly, we're just adding some distance for that versus a more direct, like here and then take a left onto the
I
street.
think this is a trail that doesn't follow an existing road.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of charting its own path through kind of the more natural area
Yeah.
over there.
That's great.
I think having a safe crossing at over, where you go,
Right.
that is something that should be explored from a connectivity perspective anyway, because it's, no one's gonna walk or bike across that right now because you're very exposed. And so that is definitely, if you're gonna take existing roads, that's a huge barrier from anyone coming from the north to try to get into town safely.
Right.
So that's not just quarry, sorry, I'm trying to make sense of this map. That's not quarry going under 65.
I think Quarry is over here.
Mhm.
Okay, yep, okay.
That's a little bit more following the river.
Yeah.
And
okay,
then
that
under
makes
the
sense.
highway and then up and around.
So,
Can I ask a separate question? do we have in this, and I mean, it doesn't have to be existing road or existing, doesn't have to be Main Street, you know, it could be a side street, but do we have a plan to connect the very north, what I would say Sterling Ponds right now, down to Cemetery Road and then across where these would intersect so people could get to either side of town in north and south, the east, west, north and south? Is that connectivity built in? Because I know for council, one of the things that we talked about recently when we were talking about housing, and if you take the map out a little bit, like the areas for housing, what we were talking about is where we grow. So like the Meyer Farm is over by the village. Is that the one we just?
Wells. Yes.
Wells, thank you. Like building out, cause there's like all this land, like on the east and mostly the west side of town. So when we build new developments, like as part of that they have to be connected to the town, and like sidewalks have to be connected so that people can walk and bike to get there, because when they did Sterling Ponds, it's like literally out there on its own. So just as informational, we thought was something we brought to their attention, that we have, like when we're building, we have to be cognizant of the fact that people need to be able to be connected. So yeah, I was just wondering if that's part of the plan already, that we're kind of making a way for north, south, east, and west to connect safely.
I would say the infrastructure that's laid out here does that.
Okay.
It's gonna, and the key to implementation, right? Because it's not all gonna happen at
Right.
once, but.
Right.
I mean, the Main Street corridor, huge.
Right.
For us. That's the backbone of the system.
Well, and with the timing piece, that is important, because I think there's always been a plan to put a trail in Hooper, which would then help connect, but at what point, that neighborhood is now pretty much fully built out and we still don't have the trail. So really trying to think about at least getting segments put in and connecting those segments. So as we were looking at the Thompson property, which is across from Sterling Ponds, we'd already planned on putting a trail extension from where it ends at White Hill Ridge up Paulson Road with the North Loop water and sewer project to have that connection. So Sterling Ponds, even if you can't get south on the other side, on the east side, you can come up around and then down Paulson.
Yeah.
And then, but that trail is on the south side of Paulson. So now we've got development wanting to come in on the north side. So making sure that developer creates a trail connection to get to that system, and making sure all those little pieces aren't just little islands off, but they're connected to the system.
From a biking perspective, Sterling Ponds really is not that disconnected, because if you come to it from if you leave Sterling Ponds and head west over the highway and down,
Yeah.
that's easy at this point. It's the east side that's the challenge.
And walking.
Yes.
Right. And then, so we wanted to talk about this green dot, right? So this would definitely be in the high complexity category. But an overcrossing of 35 to connect Sterling Ponds with all of the business development over here, and also the bike trails here. So, the location is rough. So we're the idea of a more direct connection between those two. I guess does that help? Is there more you can talk about with that?
No, that sounds great.
Didn't there used to be a?
Yeah, there used to be one across.
U-turn, somebody
Yeah,
had to have a
you
car.
could get across right about there,
Yeah.
Yes.
previously. Yes.
And there's
There used
gonna
to be an
be,
entrance there to that area.
there's gonna be, two larger developments just northwest of that. I'm really terrible at directions. Just,
Towards the green.
Yeah.
Green square,
Yep.
That's the town says.
Yeah, that's a
Kinda-
golf course right now, right?
golf course
Mhm.
or,
where you're,
Radio
so, yeah,
Road
that's
area.
gonna be, like housing development, and then the one above that is gonna be an apartment development. Like where that blue line is. So, that'll be a lot more traffic.
was there, or is there a new water tower that went up and
It's in process.
it's in the process? Okay.
Footings.
I mean, I just wanna say, overall, like I live downtown, like River Falls is extremely walkable and bikeable if you live downtown, like, no problem. I think it's when you get outside of that, like corridor, like, cause I mean, I'm just thinking, my kids go to Greenwood, they can easily walk, no big deal, same to the middle school, but they can't get to the high school in what I would feel like is a super safe manner by bike, cause it's just, at least right now, there's just not, you can't get there except to go out on major roads. So,
Can there be trails beyond the university?
That's how my kids get there,
But
so they have
still-
to cross at
Same.
that terrible intersection across
Yeah.
Cascade
And that's not
Road,
ideal
or
either,
across
but
no,
Cemetery.
I think that's fine, but it's always that, like, it's the university's property, so like, if they ever wanted to be like, no, or build there, like, I'm not saying, well, we can't go out there, but I'm just saying, like, they haven't made that a nicer path in a while.
it's, it can get congested with
Yeah.
walkers and they all got
Yeah.
headphones in. and-
Horses.
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 That's where I.
No, and that's what we probably, we're gonna send them on the bus, but the point is that, like, the university hasn't made that a pathway yet
Mhm.
to make it easier to get there. And they could, and they don't, so. I don't know. It's a lot of land right there.
Mhm.
Anyway. Observation.
I think the recent campus type planning for health institutions and universities potentially is to, I mean, there was a huge wave where they were very closed and focused internally, and the new wave is to open them back up and have connections and streets through them, so I can really see that potential in the future.
Yeah, that would be nice if there was a throughway.
You have to get something from north of Cascade.
Yeah.
South and up to the high school. Or a safe crossing across Cascade.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think where that could be. What they have to tear.
Yeah.
I mean, they could go across the river. But, you know,
Well, there's been talk
Oh,
about
sure.
Sixth Street going through for years, which is a mixed blessing, of course, because I like walking and biking on
I
that
know, I
path
know,
right now.
I
That's
know.
how we get to that end of town. But, yeah.
But if it were, then putting like impediments.
What are we looking at now, Maria?
Oh, I just went down to the area around
Oh, yep.
the campus.
yeah.
So these are the projects. This isn't showing any existing infrastructure.
Well, and with the expansion of South Wilson Lane, I think that'll be really nice.
Here.
Mhm.
What does the expansion of South Wilson Lane look like? Sorry, I'm a
Putting
little
sidewalks
moved a
on
little
both
bit,
sides,
but
right?
It will go from a more rural cross section to a more urban cross section, so there will be curb and gutter I can't remember if it's sidewalks on both sides, but the path will be reconstructed.
Yeah, the path for sure is on one side, but does it go all the way?
Did what?
It does.
Mhm.
So that's southwestern, so is that from Moody's to?
Yeah.
Kind of the corner where
Yeah,
the
and
soccer
it'll
fields are,
include a roundabout at
And then-
Cascade and Lawson.
all the way up to Division? Is that,
No, it's going from
Cascade.
Cascade to the cemetery.
the cemetery? Okay, so, gotcha, from Moody's to the high school essentially.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Mhm.
Roundabout movies.
That would be so
Gotcha.
much
That
better.
would be
That would
nice,
be
yeah.
wonderful.
So adding a third roundabout at that point
Mhm.
on Cascade. Anything for the northern part of Wausau? I thought it was fine until my kids had football practice
Yeah.
and flag football and soccer and that sort of thing. And I just feel bad for the people who live in Wausau because everybody just parks there.
And there are no sidewalks either side.
There's no
right?
sidewalks.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's,
that's how you can practice fields?
A lot of people.
there is
yeah.
a
Mhm.
public access.
Once we take down all the trees.
Oh.
Then you can put in the sidewalk.
I mean,
I've been sitting for it.
Yeah, when there's no cars parked and it's fall and it's picture perfect.
Mhm.
Streets are staying.
That's a shame.
Fight the tight mic.
Let's just go back in time.
They've got seniority.
So, let me make sure we're talking about the policy and the program side of things. Similarly here, we looked at the level of priority and the level of complexity. For policies and programs, the recommendation, the priority level is really relative to the other recommendations. And the factors that are increasing the priority are, does this directly lead to changes in the built environment? Or does it increase the city's staff and funding capacity to implement changes? And then same with complexity, it's the recommendations are categorized relative to each other. And then the factors that increase the complexity would be if we need to coordinate with partners, or if there's some higher cost associated with it. So things that the city could do without having to coordinate with anyone else, that's gonna be easier. So high priority, low complexity are quick wins. Revising subdivision ordinances to align with ambitious biking and walking goals. Updating zoning policy to require sidewalk or trail construction with any development over a certain number of units, I should say of units, within a designated growth area or in an existing gap in the current biking and walking network. Third, and I know Mike wanted to talk about this one, develop a complete streets policy to prioritize the needs of people biking and walking in River Falls. Increase staff capacity or seek external support for grant writing to implement infrastructure recommendations on an accelerated timeline. We did include some information about different sources, and there's just a lot of money out there right now to support this kind of work. And you know, it's about making that happen, writing an application. And then the fifth one, identifying a clear point person for walking and biking coordination and implementation within the city, and then allocating some staff time to that work. Typically helps in a lot of cities to get things done. So with the complete streets policy, Mike, did you have anything specifically you wanted to talk about? It was Mike who brought it up, right? You can finish here.
Thank you. Well, One, honestly, I don't know enough about complete streets policy, that's my fault, but, do you have an overarching policy of where Falls has complete streets, or is it like Main Street or Second Street?
It's more of an overarching policy for the city, and each city does it a little bit differently. In some places, they'll establish a hierarchy of modes. So often most vulnerable users at the top of the hierarchy. So it can kind of, it can depend on a lot of local factors, but there's a National Complete Streets Coalition, and there's model policies to take a look at and see what kind of fits. But what it comes back to is having a policy that guides the development of streets. So when you're, I don't know, doing a maintenance project, or you need to reconstruct a street, you aren't relying on an advocate to be at the table to say, well, what about people walking and biking? It's the foundation of the approach to streets in the community to say, okay, well, first we start with our complete streets policy. What does that say about how we're supposed to balance the needs of people traveling by different modes? Is that helping?
It's more than I knew before. In my head, what complete streets was, like the streets where there's no cars and you're just, Main Street, you're walking down and it's all shops and wonderful and all that kind of stuff, but same time, but so that's why I asked, because I know that's probably not right, not accurate.
Yeah, so it's a lot of complete streets policies say it's not all modes on all roads necessarily, but about creating a transportation network that is complete, no matter which mode of transportation you're taking, and trying to, I think it's a shift to seeing the streets more holistically than we have in the past, where it's been really just, how can we get the maximum number of cars through as fast as possible?
Yeah, back to our conversation before about prioritizing speed versus making it safe and comfortable for the most vulnerable users, whether that's children, elderly, people with mobility issues, to be able to use those places safely. And so there may be a recommendation to close a street and make it a pedestrian mall, or there's different design approaches where you can still allow cars through there, but the design, the materials, the width, the streetscape is such that cars are going through very rarely, and it's primarily for pedestrians. There may be, again, with the all modes, it doesn't mean that you have transit on every street. But that can be part of a complete streets policy, is where you have your transit and transit stops and those kinds of things. So yeah, definitely it's that approach, and it's not necessarily all modes on all roads kind of thing, but we're really trying to think about what our priorities are in terms of how we utilize that space, and maybe reprioritizing things than how we have traditionally.
La Crosse adopted the first policy in Wisconsin, so you can check their website.
Oh, were you a part of that?
I was there. I wasn't there.
Just saying.
High priority, medium complexity. Two ideas are in this category: create a flexible or designated pool of city capital funds that would be used to close short gaps in walking and biking networks. And then the other gets back to what we were talking about with the 65 interchange in Main Street, coordinating with WisDOT around the creation of a connection there. would be, yeah, a little bit more complex because we're gonna have to work outside of the city to make that happen. I think we don't have any actual high complexity policy programs that are also high priority. So that's pretty much everything that is in the plan. And the next thing would just be for you all to discuss what way you want to go on a decision for a motion for tonight. So anything we want to discuss, think about before moving on to that?
Great, so to clarify, you'll be voting on to whether or not you're gonna be recommending, right? As a steering committee, people who have been most in-depth in the process, people who have the most knowledge of the process, right? Whether or not you're gonna be recommending that to plan commission and council, which will then actually formally adopt the plan and make it legal, right? As we've talked about, there's rooms for clarification, there's rooms for adding a little bit. This is not you guys are not signing off and you know, approving the highest and greatest version of this as well. So yeah, we'll just look for you to go ahead and make a motion maybe, or if you want to have a discussion on the conditions of approval, if you feel that's relevant as well. But as a steering committee, this is sort of a you guys thing, less so than an us thing as staff members. We're just here to answer your questions and help with any discussion, if that's helpful.
Just so you know though, as a city council member, when you send it as is, which, you know, I wasn't here, so I really want to just, like, we take that with a lot of weight. So if you guys are saying, hey, this is what we like, plan commission will take that with a lot of weight. So if there are any changes you want to make, you know, prior to what meeting are we doing this?
December 15th is planning commission.
And then we'll do it
Council
in
in March.
So if there are, I mean, there's time to make changes if you want, but we do, like, we do take great weight in what people have said already. Like, we don't want to redo the wheel if you guys have already created a plan that works. So if there are changes, like, for sure, say something.
Sure, and we've been taking notes, we've recorded the meeting. You know, staff and Maria is gonna relook at this and add in the things that we've talked about as well. I don't think we need a specific motion if we want to address those, but like you were saying, if there's anything that you feel needs to be added or anything just generally that is missing or needs to be addressed, that would be certainly included. That could be certainly included in the conditions of approval.
We're also still going to have a public comment period on this plan as well as the outdoor rec plan and the comp plan in February. So again, if you're like talking about it, thinking about it, things kind of settle and you're like, oh, hey, you know, maybe we could make this adjustment here, make this language stronger. This idea occurred to me and I just don't see it anywhere in the plan. So again, there's additional opportunities to use that in. So.
But this is like the 20-year, right? 10 or 20.
This one's the 5-year plan. This is what we want to kind of head in that direction. And then in 5 years, we're going to be checking it again and saying, yep, are we on our path towards implementation? Do we need to tweak some things, redo some of our network recommendations? But this is a functional plan. So this is, we're really thinking about a system and in more of a short-term kind of timeline. And then the comp plan is the 10 to 20 year plan. So yeah, so we get the comp plan, it's got those overarching policies and goals, but it doesn't get to this level of making network recommendations, for example, or saying, here's where we need an enhanced crossing. This plan did more analysis. And so the comp plan will still have some goals and priorities that align with these. But then this gets you further down the road than the comp plan would for actually doing stuff.
Do you feel like we looked carefully enough at the schools? I know you mentioned that, and that's of course my top priority. I would say just making sure all of our schools are accessible.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I live near Alyssa, so it's easy for my kids, was easy for my kids to get there. But I see I saw and still see just tons and tons of people that are just driving their kids to school. And so I just don't know how this safe to school plan would work, or if that's something that it could even be captured or changed through this plan, because maybe that's what we do as Americans, or what we do in Wisconsin. I'm not sure. But
I think too, I have noticed that we could build the best sidewalks and all of that. I think there's some bit of a generational shift in terms of letting your kids walk to school unaccompanied. So that, I mean, we could do all those things and it still wouldn't make a difference, but I think that's changing, but
I agree with that. I think that's a bigger thing that, you know, we had people driving their kids to school from where we live, which is 2 blocks away.
I let our kids walk by them.
I did too.
And someone told me I was brave. I was like, really, honestly, it has nothing to do with any of that. It's just the fact that like, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I see some parents, they let their kids walk, but they're 30 feet behind in the car. I mean, that's a good start, but it's also unfortunate that so many people think that way, that you can't let your kids walk to school.
But I mean, it's you know, I mean, I'm an older parent of young children, and so I grew up in the really before like people got nervous about like stranger danger and stuff like that, and so I get it, but yeah. So I don't know, it could be, but I do notice more kids walking to school the last year or two than I did before.
So a Safe Routes to School plan is kind of another, well, it's kind of parallel to this bike ped plan, but maybe another layer to it, where we would work with a specific partner and a particular kind of population to look at the system from that perspective. And so we did a Safe Routes to Schools plan in 2007. And I think some pieces have been implemented, and so we tried to carry some of those recommendations forward into this plan. But one of the things that can be beneficial to do that kind of sub-plan is there can sometimes be funding sources that are tied more directly, specifically to that. But it's the same kinds of tools and analysis we use in the bike and ped plan. We're looking at safe crossings, we're looking at, you know, safe ways to walk or bike, where there might be traffic, identifying which streets are low stress for those types of populations. But then also similarly, you know, you have the infrastructure, but you also need to do maybe some programs and education to help encourage people to do the walking and biking. So I know some schools will do a walking school bus, right? So, you know, a parent may accompany the kids and they'll go along and they'll pick up the next kids from the next house, and they'll pick up the next kids. So then they end up in a group, and that can feel safer. And then parents can trade off who does that. And then maybe depending on the kid level, they'll do that with bicycles, you know, and they'll bike to the next house, pick up the next kids on their bikes. But oftentimes there's an adult that goes with them. And that's something that helps increase the comfort level of using those different modes to get to school. So that's something that would take coordination with our school partners, but the schools also need the city to help provide the infrastructure. So schools can often do a lot of programs and education, but then the cities can do the infrastructure piece. So I think that's something where, as we're looking at these networks and prioritization, is having those conversations about that partnership. And if we can start identifying, maybe we might be able to move a few of these projects a little bit further, you know, quicker, because now we've got the partners and, you know, interest in doing that.
I wanted to note, we do have a recommendation in the policy section, develop a safe routes to school program for all K through 12 schools in River Falls, building on the 2008 plan. And currently it's identified as kind of medium benefit. So one possibility is like if you feel actually that would be a really high benefit, to categorize it that way, and it would kind of pop up into the major high benefit projects category, to boost it a little for implementation.
So I thought the school district had received funding to do the Safe Routes to School plan, and they were working with West Central Wisconsin. But I am not 100% sure if they pulled the trigger or not.
I haven't heard anything, but that doesn't mean, it could be happening at a high level and I wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
Could somebody from staff contact the superintendent about that? And just, because I think the other thing that would be interesting to know from a parent perspective, do parents want that? Like, because they could say, no, I like driving my kid, or I like putting them on the bus. I don't want my child to walk her back to school. And that might be, then we have that answer, at least for the next 5 years. So there's a prioritization of the work that the city's doing.
That's a good point, as I think about like families I work with, a lot of them are dropping their kids off at 6:30 in the morning, right? Because that's when they leave for work. So they're not gonna send their 8-year-old walking to school in the dark at 6:30 in the morning, so it might not be practical for a lot of families. I walked with my kids to Greenwood because I could flex my work schedule, so I didn't have to be to work till 8:30, but not everybody has that luxury. So I think that's a good point, that maybe we need to start with more talking with the families, with parents, to see if that is something that's a high priority for our community generally. Or if there are other circumstances that are beyond the control of the school district or the city that are making it,
Right.
Maybe they would walk and bike for their recreation when they have the free time, but getting to school is just not practical, walking or biking.
I think, I don't know how hard this would be, but maybe even asking the superintendent if they would send out a survey.
Yeah, identifying the barriers.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we did with the engagement here,
Mhm.
is if, how do you currently get there? How would you like to get there?
Right.
What are the things that are getting in the way of you doing it the way that you
Yeah, because they could even send it out like, this is on behalf of the city, but we want to know what parents think
Yeah, I think that's a good
about that. Just so we're not, I don't want to say the word waste, it's not wasting time, but also like there could be other priorities if parents are like, no, we're happy with the way it is now.
So what I'm hearing is that we're overall pretty happy with the draft plan.
Mhm.
And we want to maybe do a little bit more to address specifically around schools. We could vote to approve the plan or we could vote to recommend the plan to council and plan commission with the condition that, staff spend a little bit more time seeing if we need to make an update to our Safe Routes to School plan, or B, just kind of generally measure kind of the atmosphere or the interest among family members and community members to, have that option for folks or for kids to bike and walk to school a little bit more easily.
So I think, with what Maria read in terms of what's in the document,
Mhm.
that at least gives us a direction to head.
Mhm.
And then we can get into how do we actually get there, and how soon do we get there, and what more information do we need? Because I think that's the thing with this plan, is it's getting us more specific than the comp plan, but there's still things that, like, are there rapid flashing beacons at those?
Right.
There's gonna need to be more information, analysis for a lot of the pieces of this. So, we do talk about the Safe Routes to Schools in the plan, address that way.
So you think don't amend it, that you're saying to let that language stay, and then that would.
I think it's pretty strong. I think Maria's recommendation, if you want to just boost the priority level from medium to high priority, I think that could be a recommendation that you make, like, yep, we like the plan, but schools are particularly important. We know that that's an issue. So let's maybe explore this sooner rather than later to see if it's something we need to get into, or how we can get.
Just so we have that we can, because the plans are flexible enough that if situations change, we can change the prioritization.
Absolutely.
And it's not like we're gonna be penalized if things change and it's not as high priority, it's more just drawing attention to the fact, and then that makes it easier for staff to say, well, look, we've identified this in our planning processes, so. Yeah, we could certainly, that could certainly be an option to vote to raise the priority level of that recommendation. That'd be appropriate as a community-led plan, as community members, as steering committee members, right, so. I do want to be respectful and conscious of the time and everybody else's time. It is 8 o'clock.
I move that we send the bike and pedestrian plan to this plan commission and city council as is. Cause you guys can still do those things even if we do it as is, so.
Does someone have to second that?
Yeah.
Is there a second?
I second that.
All in favor
Aye.
Aye.
and opposed? Yay.
And if you, I mean, like, I'm happy to go with you to talk to the superintendent, you know, just, I mean, if you don't know him. Okay.
Got that ball rolling right now.
Yeah, cause I think, I do think that there are some just barriers in parenting styles that might actually make some of the things just not really a priority.
Well, find out first if they're working on it, and
Yeah.
if they're not, then maybe I'll follow up with some of those questions.
Do we know at all what the breakdown of ratio is in town students versus rural students or anything like that? Assuming it's not 50-50 or anything like that, but.
Greenwood is mostly in town kids. Cause Sterling Ponds goes to Rocky Branch, so
Correct, yeah.
we go up to Heidi Meadows.
Okay.
And then a little bit of like kind of out there, but I think most of the kids at at Greenwood are in town
In
kids.
town, yeah.
Rocky Branch has a lot of the rural.
Okay.
And then West Side, I think, is also like kids that live closer to West Side.
So they are currently working on consultants to gather more data about enrollment and
Yeah.
those kinds of things as well, so there'll be more information.
Yeah, I guess my biggest takeaway is from all of this is, which is great, is getting kids to school safely.
Yeah.
Which was huge, which is great. More so than, you know, your tourism and that sort of thing. I think that is great too, but it comes second, and especially on everybody's kind of agenda being, me and my wife, we've got 2 young kids, and so that's obviously priority, and that's gonna be priority for most people, but yeah, safety, and then it's gonna come your economic and tourism and that sort of thing, so,
And the more safe we make it, the more appealing it will be to
absolutely. Yeah.
folks who come to visit
Mhm.
and that too.
So I think we've already touched on all of this, but we'll just refine the final draft a little bit from what we heard tonight. Send that plan on to the plan commission and to city council and begin implementation. And the key dates are up there, and if you want to participate in those.
Well, great.
Did you say you would send a reminder for December?
I was just gonna say. I will
I don't have my phone.
I will certainly send a reminder and just kind of a follow-up, like another, in case you hadn't had enough, another copy of our updated draft based on the conversations we had this evening, and everything else, but that's everything. I wanna thank you all again so much for taking the time and out of your days to really have these conversations with us and provide us your own knowledge and experiences as we do this really critical process. So thank you all very much, and we really, really appreciate you guys all, so.
We'll right back at you. Thank you for making this an enjoyable process. hard work, oh my goodness. Think